Now remember, Clooney's the same guy who held a star-studded fundraiser for Joe weeks before he dropped out and only called for him to quit after his disastrous debate.
What's the matter, George? Are the Hollywood roles getting a little hard to come by as you age and get decidedly more smug and self-congratulatory? I'm just asking.
Clooney opined on the future of the party. I bet there's one person in particular he thinks is spectacular.
There's one person in particular I think is spectacular. There are a few who I think is levitating above that is Wes Moore. I like him a lot. I think he could be someone we could all...
Wow, if that's Clooney with makeup.
Speaking as Edward R. Murrow, he warns about the ongoing struggle for truth and integrity in the media. Truth and integrity. About the potential for the media to be manipulated and used for propaganda.
Guess who's back? Not with a film, not with a cause, but with unsolicited political wisdom no one needed. George Clooney, the man who turned Batman into a runway model at a funeral, is now parading around like he's the Secretary of State. Apparently, sipping espresso in Lake Como gives you license to lecture the world. Who knew being the face of Nespresso made you a geopolitical guru? This isn't activism. It's ego and designer sunglasses. Clooney isn't saving the world. He's cosplaying as someone who matters.
Wow, if that's Clooney with makeup. Imagine what he looks like without it, huh? Now remember, Clooney's the same guy who held a star-studded fundraiser for Joe weeks before he dropped out and only called for him to quit after his disastrous debate. Clooney ignored concerns over Biden's age for years, only to magically come to the conclusion that he was demented when America finally saw what Clooney had been hiding. That's the problem with Dems. They're obedient shills for awful people, then pretend otherwise once voters see that they're full of. But remember, we were pointing out Joe's dementia before it was cool. We knew Biden was the worst president ever.
Clooney strutted into the spotlight once again, high on his own Hollywood fumes, mistaking cheekbones for credibility and charm for clarity. He rolled into the public discourse like some sparkling prophet, only to get absolutely wrecked by people who don't equate abs with intellect. And when Megyn Kelly and Greg Gutfeld came swinging, Clooney didn't just lose the argument, he lost the plot. It wasn't a debate, it was a demolition. By the end, all he looked ready to endorse was a brand new line of ultra-soft tissues for when the ego bruises start to sting.
Tonight we check in with the poor man's Greg Gutfeld, George Clooney. Remember, he wrote a scathing op-ed prior to the election calling on Joe Biden to drop out? And this week he took to CNN, the only place he's seen less than in his own movies, to gloat. God, I hope I hope Jake Tapper doesn't plant his lips firmly on George's puckered ass.
George Clooney, the millionaire philosopher king of Hollywood, loves to scold everyday Americans from the comfort of his $100 million Italian palace, sparkling water in hand, like he's just returned from solving world hunger with a smirk. The man hasn't laid eyes on a Walmart since ER was still must-see TV, but sure, he's totally in tune with your gas prices and grocery bills. Nothing says blue-collar hero like soaring in on a private jet to tell farmers how they're ruining the planet. At this rate, his next PSA will be filmed on a pearl-encrusted yacht about how regular folks should recycle more.
Julia Roberts, who outed herself not only as a leftist, which we knew, but as somebody who, and by the way, she's also a husband stealer. She stole the husband that she has right now in a reported affair. So, okay, maybe don't be the voice of the ad in which we talk about women betraying their husbands, because in the leftist view, marriages are not about honesty and talking about one's differences and agreeing to disagree on certain dicey issues, but they're about lying. And they believe this so strongly, you put it in an ad. And her pal, George Clooney, who did something similar for another ad.
This wasn't a political flop. It was a cosmic correction. The universe finally snapped after years of Clooney's smug monologues and red carpet righteousness. You can only coast on charm and cheekbones for so long before someone serves you a flaming platter of humiliation, garnished with sarcasm and a standing ovation from the fed-up masses. Clooney didn't fall from grace. He crash-landed in a masterclass on what happens when fake wisdom meets real backlash.
You know, he's the opposite of radical. But the weird thing is, without a horse to back, do you really know what he believes in? Like, I know what he's against. He's against Trump. But in this new world of common sense, what does he align with? Is he he might have way more in common with Trump than he is with the progressives. The question is, does he have the bravery to say that? I have no idea where he stands on the border, sanctuary cities, or trans extremism. How does he feel about the fires in LA? Is he happy with how it was handled by Mayor What's-Her-Face and Governor who's his name? You know,
Let's be real. George Clooney's entire political act is rich guy theater dressed up as virtue. He drifts into the discourse like a cologne ad with opinions, batting his perfectly pampered lashes, expecting the world to stop and swoon because, remember, he played smart on TV once? Who needs facts, credentials, or logic when you've got that Oscar-worthy, I feel it in my soul stare? And if you dare question him, clearly you're just some backwoods barbarian who doesn't appreciate celebrity enlightenment. But the real masterpiece here, Clooney actually thought he'd deliver his grand sermon, flash a smirk, and get a standing ovation like he just saved cinema. Instead, he got bodied by people immune to Hollywood glitter and tired of reheated wisdom. Watching Clooney get verbally turned into mulch was poetic, like tossing a Rolex into a demolition derby. Shiny, overpriced, and hopelessly out of its depth.
Fundraiser, where he saw Biden almost falling off the stage, where Obama came out to grab him, was June 15th. The debate was June 27th. It wasn't until July 10th, almost a month after he attended the fundraiser with him, that George Clooney finally wrote that op-ed after it became clear that Joe Biden wasn't stepping down. He's such a liar.
His response? Vintage Clooney meltdown. That signature furrowed brow, the bruised ego barely held together by A-list denial, and that dazed expression like he just found out not everyone worships at the altar of his perfectly curated persona. He looked less like a statesman and more like a drama teacher, realizing the class would rather scroll TikTok than watch his one-man Shakespeare act. The man genuinely thought he was descending like some cinematic deity, only to get roasted like a homecoming mascot in the middle of a dunk contest. And the way he speaks, Clooney doesn't debate, he performs. Every word oozes faux profundity, like he's narrating a dolphin documentary on antidepressants. He could be discussing parking meters, and still sound like he's mourning the fall of civilization. Breathy pauses, soulful stares, and that perpetual head tilt. It's not politics, it's perfume commercial theater.
Clooney opined on the future of the party. I bet there's one person in particular he thinks is spectacular.
There's one person in particular I think is spectacular. There are a few who I think is levitating above that is Wes Moore. I like him a lot. I think he could be someone we could all join in behind. We have to find somebody rather soon. It's our job now to put together a proper team to stand up because we're right now polling very poorly.
I love that. Levitating above, as opposed to sinking to the bottom, like his last movie.
So, of course, he thought he could walk into a nuanced debate, offer up a vague monologue that sounded like it was...
Then comes Gutfeld. Sharp, fast, and utterly unimpressed. One verbal jab and Clooney's whole polished persona collapses like a Hollywood set in a windstorm. That golden glow, gone. What's left? Just another celebrity who confused applause with accuracy. Enter Megyn Kelly, wielding sarcasm like a scalpel dipped in fire. She didn't argue, she dissected. And Clooney's sanctimonious script? It crumbled into a steaming mess of ego and stunned silence. He showed up expecting to deliver a TED Talk drenched in praise. What he got was an unscheduled comedy roast, and he wasn't on the mic, he was the punchline. There's a rare kind of satisfaction in watching a man who's lived 2 decades in a yes-man bubble finally hit a wall of unfiltered reality. For years, Clooney's been told he's brilliant, brave, and breathtaking, mainly by people dying for a cocktail invite at Lake Como. But this time, someone actually said it. His political wisdom has all the depth of a sun-dried kiddie pool.
This is to 60 last night about, you mentioned his op-ed in the New York Times on Joe Biden, and why he did it. Such a selfless, brave act, Ben. Here he was.
I was raised to tell the truth. I had seen the president up close for this fundraiser, and I was surprised. And so I feel as if there was a lot of profiles in cowardice in my party through all of that.
You could practically hear the panic echoing through Beverly Hills, his publicist downing wine like it's holy water, frantically typing, How to untank a celebrity ego in 24 hours into Google, while interns lit scented candles and muttered desperate affirmations. Meanwhile, Clooney just blinked into the abyss, stunned that his chiseled face didn't auto-erase the nonsense he just spewed. His words, so spectacularly clueless, they could have pitched their own Bravo spin-off. This is what happens when someone mistakes photogenic lighting for prophetic insight. Clooney spent years being treated like the human equivalent of a cashmere throw, fancy, admired, but useless the moment real substance is needed. He walks into a room, and people react like the second coming just sauntered in. He raises an eyebrow, boom, suddenly he's a UN advisor. The man could mumble into a mic mid-sneeze, and Vogue would crown him the new conscience of the free world.
George, someone call the UN. Clooney's just invented unity.
New nuggets are breaking. Tara Palmieri, who's got her own Substack and podcast now, she's been on the show, she got a copy and released a couple of the nuggets, and so did The Guardian. But hers was a really interesting nugget. And she's apparently in this book, they reveal that George Clooney saw Morning Joe one day, right after his op-ed, and Mika Brzezinski was suggesting that Barack Obama was behind the George Clooney op-ed. That was basically making Clooney seem like Obama's puppet. Yeah. Here's the Mika clip.
You can almost see the slogans now.
Of course, he thought he could strut into a complex debate, drop a poetic word salad ripped from a Hallmark card that once took a sociology elective, and moonwalk out to standing ovations. But instead of thunderous praise, Clooney got hit with the rhetorical equivalent of a dead fish and a reminder that passion isn't a substitute for knowledge. His speech didn't just flop, it nosedived in flames. Imagine Siri at a funeral. Cocktail in one hand, thesaurus in the other, words spilling out like a parody of purpose. That's Clooney on politics. All posture, no point. His faux intellectual act is like your cousin who binged The West Wing once and now thinks he's ready to broker Middle East peace deals over brunch. He strings together phrases overheard at five-star fundraisers, adds a few solemn head tilts, and declares himself the moral compass of the Pacific Coast. We must come together, he preaches. Groundbreaking, George. Alert the international community. Clooney's just discovered diplomacy.
I think, this Johnny-come-lately, I was raised to be honest, is a bunch of BS. All right? Obama told him to do it. He sees himself as this extremely important person. I think he's an arrogant, condescending, smug individual.
You can already picture the merch. Faux rustic signs in boutique gift shops that read, Clooney February 2024, leading with vibes, not policy. Because that's what he's become. Not a thought leader, but the human embodiment of Pinterest with a microphone. He's less Socratic thinker, more Instagram quote wall, slick font, poetic phrasing, and absolutely zero substance. Scratch past the Clooney gloss and what you find isn't depth. It's a man unraveling live on air because the world finally stopped clapping. Once the spotlight dims, the tux stops working its magic, and suddenly the emperor isn't just exposed, he's mid-rant, halfway through a sentence, realizing the room's gone silent. Watching Clooney crack under scrutiny felt like watching a $200 candle melt in a wildfire. Slow, dramatic, and painfully outmatched. The more he clung to that polished, serene facade, the more transparent his panic became. And the meltdown? A masterpiece. A full-scale identity crisis masquerading as civic concern. By the end, he looked ready to speed dial Amal and beg her to sue reality itself for defamation.
He should be able to tell people in America, and the Democrat Party certainly, what they should and shouldn't do. This president, Joe Biden, is one of the most disastrous presidents that we've had in American history.
You know it's bad when even his celebrity buddies start slow walking out of frame like, we stand Clooney, but this ain't the brand we signed up for. Somewhere, their group chat is lighting up with messages like, yo, did George just nuke his credibility? And someone change his Wi-Fi password before he explains crypto again. And let's not pretend this is his first political pratfall. Clooney's track record of awareness raising is more ego trip than enlightenment. Hashtag activism with zero fact-checking, like he's rehearsing for Hamilton, the Instagram Reels edition. But this time was different, because for once, the audience didn't clap. No misty-eyed influencers reposted his speech. No dramatic piano music swelled behind his words. Instead, people blinked, sighed, and passed the mic to someone with actual answers. And for a man like George Clooney, who's lived off applause like oxygen, that's silence. That was the real knockout punch.
Has gone silent.
So she and George get together and they start navel gazing on stage about themselves, of course, and their vaunted profession and how bad, how just terrible the media is, and had the following exchange.
What we do in this is we talk about the responsibility of journalists to hold truth to power, right? That's our goal. And so if you're doing that, and we don't tell people what to think when we show that montage at the end, for instance.
And while the internet lit up with memes of Clooney looking like a malfunctioning robot at a
As the internet flooded with memes of Clooney glitching out like a rejected TEDx robot, his PR team scrambled to spin it as some raw, vulnerable moment. But let's be real. This wasn't emotional depth. It was a televised ego crash wearing a $6,000 blazer. He didn't just get criticized. He got verbally benched by people who don't need a soft focus lens and orchestral background to drop actual insight. Let's not kid ourselves. Clooney will be fine. He'll retreat to his Lake Como mansion, sip wine aged longer than most influencers have been alive, and call it a learning moment on some late-night interview. But that clip, that glorious, unfiltered clip of him face-planting in high definition, that's immortal. A digital caution sign flashing, charm not equal to competence. And the brutal twist, none of this would have happened if Clooney hadn't walked in thinking he was bulletproof. He assumed his celebrity force field would protect him. Instead, it just made the impact louder.
Is trying to find a marquee name to front a dreadful remake of Heaven's Gate. And I don't mean the movie.
that he could waltz into a
He strutted in like he was delivering the Sermon on the Mount. Chin high, eyes twinkling, every syllable dripping with that unmistakable Clooney cadence. You know the one, that mix of faux gravitas and aftershave commercial charm. He expected gasps, standing ovations, maybe even a slow tear from someone in the third row. Instead, a digital clothesline, a social media smackdown that arrived with the fury of 1,000 quote tweets, each one dunking on him in glorious 4K. Clooney didn't just misread the room, he misread the entire decade. He walked into a world that's run out of patience for Hollywood sermons and imagined he was still playing the lead. But real people are tired. Tired of being talked down to by millionaires who sip imported water on Italian verandas and then claim to speak for the working class. His fans tried CPR on the moment, bless them. They spun it as brave truth-telling, emotional vulnerability, a call to unity. But let's call it what it really was. Bravery without homework, just arrogance in a tuxedo. What we witnessed wasn't a courageous stand. It was a veteran actor confusing applause with authority, charisma with competence, and fame with facts. And George wasn't silenced, he was schooled, publicly, brutally, and in real time. He didn't just lose the room, he lost the illusion that charm could still bend reality, that a well-moisturized monologue and a smirk, borrowed from an espresso ad, could survive a real conversation with actual stakes. It wasn't that he made a mistake. Everyone does. It was that he walked in thinking he couldn't. That he was too adored, too beautiful, too carefully polished to be challenged. But the world doesn't care how symmetrical your face is anymore, especially when you try to serve vibes where people are demanding substance. And when it came time to actually say something meaningful, he flailed, he stammered, he blinked like the answer was floating just to the left of his cheekbone. Every sentence was a dramatic pause wrapped around a recycled platitude. He spoke like he was auditioning to narrate a commercial for peace, not engage in a serious political discussion. Because the truth is, gravitas isn't a lighting effect. It's not the glow you get from standing in front of a golden hour window in a $3,000 blazer. It's earned. It's the product of sleepless nights spent reading, learning, unlearning. It's found in uncomfortable conversations and hard questions, not in after-dinner speeches at film festivals. Clooney has spent decades being the man everyone else wanted to be, the face, the charm, the cool. But when the mask slipped, when the world finally asked him for more than the smirk, what we saw wasn't a wise statesman. It was a man spiraling mid-rant, clearly unprepared for a room that didn't care how many magazine covers he's graced. He didn't just get challenged, he got dragged, like a lawn chair in a hurricane. And the saddest part? He thought he was helping. He thought he was here to elevate the conversation, to rescue the discourse with a few vaguely inspirational lines. But instead of applause, He got intellectual whiplash. And the man who once played Batman learned that a cape doesn't protect you from public scrutiny. He became the punchline. The cautionary tale. A living reminder that if you've spent your whole career being told you're the smartest man in the room, it's easy to forget you still have to prove it. George thought he was delivering wisdom. What he delivered was a meme, and not the good kind.